I'd like to call the study session of the Board of Directors of Tacoma Public Schools to order for March 21st, 2019. Would you please rise for the flag salute? And Director Winsko, would you lead us in the flag salute, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right. Tonight we are here to talk about one subject, and it will be you talking rather than us. Normally, our study sessions are just for the school board only, but because of what's going on in our district right now with the topics of potential budget cuts and what's not going on in Olympia is why we're here tonight. And one of the things we want to do is to begin to look ahead for our budget planning for 2019-20. The current reality is that we're facing a $30 million loss of revenue due next school year due to dramatic changes in the state funding formula for education. And dealing with that loss of funding is going to require some pretty difficult decisions. And to help us with that, we want to engage a wide cross-section of our community in conversations around programs and the services that we provide and what people in our community value most. We'll have more of these work study sessions in other locations, and you can look for announcements on our website and our social media accounts for the dates and places. We're working really hard in Olympia with our supportive local legislators to change the funding formula to restore some of this lost funding. But because of the way on the levy situation, the way that this assessor's office allocates out money, we won't see a lot of that money until next year if they actually do give us the ability to collect the money that our voters voted for us back a year ago, which was $2,500 per kid, not $1.50 per 1,000. So we're working hard down there. In fact, Superintendent Santorno is not here right now. She was down in Olympia this afternoon testifying and is on her way back, and we told her she could go home. Had a long day. So I want to thank you for being here tonight to help us get this conversation started. And at our work study sessions, I said we normally don't take public comment, but tonight we want to hear from you, and we've set aside time for that. And I would like to, is there anyone who wishes to speak who has not signed in? We have little blue cards. If you want to speak tonight, we need a little blue card from you. Nobody? Okay. You want to talk? Okay. Go sign them in. And would you give Mrs. Beatty up here in the front row the card after you've signed in? All right. So before we get to the public comment, I would like to call upon our Chief Financial Officer, Rosalind Medina, to give us a brief status update where we currently are with our budget projections. And you can see over here. So Rosalind, if you would like to go ahead.
Thank you so much. So my name is Rosalind Medina, and I am the CFO for Tacoma School District. I would like to just give you a little bit of background information that I want to share with you. I'm going to start with our successes. When we look back at our graduation rates, they have come an incredible distance. We have gained 34% graduation rates in the last 8 years, and we're very proud of that fact. And while we know that this is a great accomplishment, we know that we have a lot more work to do. And so it's with that lens that we focus all of our efforts around the budget. What comes next? What more do we need to focus our efforts on for our children? And how do we make sure that we provide an incredible program for kids? It's always good to start a little bit of a conversation with where does our money come from? So this budget is, this is the 18-19 budget. This represents 100% of our budget, and what you'll see here is that the state funds us for basic education apportionment. Those are the resources that we get from the state to cover our costs, and that represents about 75% of our budget. Other sources of revenue are our local taxes, around $60 million, that's 13%. Federal resources is about 8%, $39 million, and that covers some special education, some high poverty impacted children, English language learners, CTE, and other grants. And then we also have 3% of our budget for other costs, other revenues, donations, charges back to other school districts for services that we're providing to them, and some other grants. Our primary revenue driver is enrollment, and so our basic education allocation is really based off of what our enrollment is. Our enrollment projection for the upcoming year, is 27,863 full-time equivalent students. Now, across the district, if we add our preschool enrollment and our students who are continuing on past the 12th grade, we're getting closer to a 30,000 student population. But what we're funded off of is the 27,000. If we look at our enrollment history over the last 10 years, we've only grown about 75 students in 10-year period. So we have pretty flat enrollment, and it goes up and down depending on the grade groups. It also goes up and down depending on the year. But overall, what we've been seeing is a relatively flat enrollment, which is good for being able to project where we're going in the future. What we'll see over the next 10 years is an anticipated increase of 857 students. And that's about a 3% increase. To talk a little bit about where our funding goes, this graph represents our 2018-19 100% of our expenditures. And you'll see those first three boxes on the left, they really represent the majority of our costs. And those costs are centered around staff. You'll see the first bracket there, $207 million, is our certificated salaries. Certificated is terminology used by the state to define teachers, counselors, librarians, people who hold a teaching certificate or are required to hold a certificate for their position. The rest of our staff are considered classified, and classified salaries represent around $74 million. And then in between those, you'll see the employee benefits and payroll taxes associated with those two groups. The total population of all of our people represents 83% of our budget. Beyond that, we have contractual services, around $47 million. That's 10% of our budget. And that is used to fund our transportation for basic education, our security, school resource officers that we partner with the city of Tacoma to provide, software licensing, and things of that nature. Our supplies and materials budget, so you can imagine what supplies and materials are: books, papers, cleaning supplies, curriculum, things that you need to run a school district. Around 6% of our budget is spent on those. And then off to the right, you'll see these two tiny little boxes that are almost invisible. That represents 0.5% of the remainder of our budget, and we spend those on large capital purchases and travel. So as I said, 83% of our costs come in people. And we have a great responsibility here in Tacoma. What we employ, we are the 5th largest employer in the city of Tacoma. And that puts us in a position where we really want to focus our efforts on attracting and retaining the highest quality individuals, making sure that the people are our focus and our priority, and that we're putting the best people in front of our students. That is a population of 3,695 full-time equivalents, but we also have other staff on hand. We have substitute teachers and paraeducators, we have athletic coaches, and we have hourly staff. And so our total employed population is 5,229 employees. So switching gears just a little bit to give you an understanding of what we're experiencing here in Tacoma, we have a deficit coming for the 19-20 year, and that is the budget that we are preparing for currently. There's really two major impacts associated with that deficit. One is revenue losses, and that is primarily legislatively driven. The second are cost increases. And cost increases happen every year. That's not an abnormal activity for us. We usually have to deal with some level of increase to our budget, just like you might in your home budget. We'll see natural cost increases, such as people moving up the salary schedule, also called incrementing, costs for inflation, insurance, gas costs, utilities, building upkeep, those sorts of things. And then there are changing laws that we have to address. So the Tacoma minimum wage law went from $12 to $12.35, and we have to account for that in our costs, as well as the Paid Family Medical Leave Act. We now have to pay a tax on behalf of our employees in association with that. You'll see we do have negotiated salary increases. We did negotiate with a number of our groups this past year. And what I would say is, we did make some significant reductions in the current budget, in the 2018-19 budget year, to address most of the negotiated increases that we experienced in this last year. So those have already been addressed, and that's not what the focus of our 19-20 budget development is centered around. And then there are other legislative requirements that could impact our budget. So if I go back to the revenue losses, I'm just going to touch on that real quick. If we go back to the revenue losses of $29.9 million, or roughly $30 million, those are legislatively driven, and they're driven from two things. One is the levy change in law, which I'll address in just a second, and the other is the hold harmless. You'll notice those two numbers don't add up to 30 million, and that's because we do have a little bit of increase in revenue from the state based on our current laws. And so altogether, that equates out to 30 million. So when we look at our district revenue projections for the 19-20 year, our current budget is around $467 million. That's going to decline to $437 million. And that puts us in a position where, as we look at the next 3 years, we aren't going to be seeing revenue increases based on current state law that will get us anywhere close to where our current revenues are generating. We'll be close to $13 million less in 3 years than where we are currently. How did this happen? One of the primary pieces of that is related to the new levy law. And the levy law is a two-tiered system. You qualify for the lesser of $1.50 per thousand of assessed value of the home values in your district, or $2,500 per student. So for Tacoma, we qualify for the $1.50, and that generates a 51% reduction in our levy. We started with an $86 million levy. We'll be going down to, a little more than $40 million. Now, I do want to point out that our voters in February of 2018 approved a $70 million levy. It actually goes from 70 to 72 to 74 as it progresses through. So it starts at 70 in 2018. In 2019, it would be 72 million. And they approved that with a 64% approval rating. We do not have the ability to access those funds that our voters have approved because the law limits us at a lower value. So to look at that graphically, what you'll see in 2017-18 for the total levy and the local effort assistance is a subsidy that the state provides for property poor districts to help lower the taxes in those districts. You'll see that we started with $97 million. In 2018-19, that declines to $65 million, and then that further declines into the 19-20 budget to $43 million. So I know it says 55% there, and I said 51% earlier. That accounts for the loss of LEA in association with the levy. That little orange box that talks about the $12 million is associated with our state hold harmless. Last year, we identified to the legislature, hey, we've got a problem. This bill isn't working for us that you've passed. We are impacted negatively. Please fix this. And they had a lot of conversation in Olympia. They were not able to address our needs. And so what they were able to do is provide us with a one-time fix. Those resources go away this year. And in absence of those resources being corrected last year, that impact actually carries on into the future. What we are finding with the levy that was passed is that it's highly inequitable. Here in Tacoma, we'll be able, this is illustrative, we'll be able to collect around $1,300 per student, whereas Lake Washington or an Issaquah or a Seattle can collect more than $2,000 per student. Now, I recognize that our students aren't any less valuable than those students who are attending school in Lake Washington. They have access to a significant portion more of funds to help provide important services to their students that we are not afforded that access to. What you'll also notice is that the free and reduced lunch associated with those school districts are also significantly less than our free and reduced lunch percentage. So this is where we say that we have got to work with our legislature to come up with an equitable solution. What's next for us in Tacoma as we work to develop our 19-20 budget? We're working on engaging the public. As as Director Viel indicated, we have additional meetings that we'll be having. We want to hear from the public as to what what we're doing well, what we could do differently, what some of their potential solutions are. We'll also be engaging in a budgeting by priorities process. This is a process that we use internally to align our resources to the strategic plan and ensure that the money that we're focusing is focused on our students. We're going to continue following legislative happenings. We know that there's levy legislation in the works. As we indicated, the superintendent has been down testifying on that legislation, and there's more legislation that we hear is coming. So we'll continue working with that. And I do want to point out that our local delegation does have an awareness of our issues and that they are fighting on our behalf. That this is a very contentious battle at the state level. We're going to continue with our strong financial management plan. We have worked really hard to ensure that our resources can be used in a positive and enlightening way, and we will continue focusing our efforts on that. We recognize, though, that the board has a committed expectation that we will make thoughtful and intentional resolutions to whatever deficit remains when the legislature is complete. And finally, we'll work to balance our budget. A balanced budget is required by law here in the state of Washington, and so we will provide a budget to our board that represents that. We do have a number of planned budget interactions. Things that we've already accomplished include some surveying, as well as a study session just like this that we've already held. And we are currently working with a budget advisory committee to gain feedback around some more detailed aspects of our budget. We will have budget hearings, and we do need to adopt a budget at the end of August. And that concludes the presentation from me.
Thank you. All right. You will have, Dr. Garcia, our Deputy Superintendent, will call your name to come up and speak. You'll have 3 minutes to make your comments, and Tanya, are you going to be the timekeeper? Tanya will let you know, Ms. Speedy will let you know when you're at 2 minutes, and then at 3, we'll ask you to please conclude your remarks. So is there anybody who came late who wants to sign in to speak? Give you one more, we'll give it one more shot. Okay. All right, Dr. Garcia, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you. Good evening. First tonight, we'll start with Ms. Sally Perkins on the topic of budget.
Good evening, President Vial and members of the board. I'm here tonight to ask you to protect some things in the budget as you look at these cuts. I'm going to ask you to invest more in professional development for culturally responsive teaching and education, particularly based on recent conversations. The WEA has developed some really fine professional development courses that should be made available, and in fact, they should be required and not optional, and they should be in your labor contracts ultimately for all staff, not just teachers. Teaching cultural responsiveness is both an intellectual and a social emotional process, and it requires complex and rich and transformational professional development, and that requires investment. And so I would urge you to be paying close attention to how you can deliver that professional development for your staff. Your slides show that a huge amount of your resource is your staff, and so this is a chance to really invest in them. Also to invest in your equity staff people who are fabulous. They have identified a number of resources and trainings that would support this kind of investment in professional development, and so I would urge you to, if possible, increase the resources that are available to them so that Tacoma can assure that the values that you hold around culturally responsive education can be carried out by all of your staff people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sally.
The next is Gabby, and Gabby is from Washington and here to talk about school libraries.
You brought your helpers, I see. Okay.
I really like school libraries, and I only get to.
I think the bottom. I think there was a button she might have.
I think push it on the bottom.
Don't worry, Gabby, we'll give you extra time.
Yeah, and don't worry about that.
Testing.
There you go.
And I don't get to go on Friday, and I think school libraries are full of imagination, and I really like school libraries, and it's a place where kids can learn anything, and they can be free, and and that's it.
Thank you. Gabby, what grade are you in at Washington?
2nd grade.
Awesome. I have to tell you, many, many years ago, I went to Washington School too. Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gabby. Our next speaker is Miss Beth Toms to speak about budget.
Thank you. Actually, I'm also here to speak about libraries. So currently, Tacoma Elementary School students have limited access to their school libraries. 4 school libraries are open just 2 days a week. 10 are open 3 days a week. And 8 schools' libraries are open just 4 days a week. Only 14 of the 36 school libraries are open 5 days a week. And it would take just 8.2 FTE to make all school libraries open 5 days a week. I will just speak as not only as a mother, but also as a librarian at the community college level, that data shows that students who frequent the library do better. They're better readers, they're stronger readers, and even at the community college level, those students who are library goers are better students, have higher GPA. So not only are students learning to read in the elementary schools, at some point they are reading for content and learning, not only learning to read, but reading to learn. And so please keep the funding up for the libraries. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.
That is all the blue cards. We'll do another last call for anyone else that would like to speak.
Is there anyone else that would like to come up and speak? Okay. I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. What we hear helps us when time comes to make the tough decisions, and they will be tough decisions for all of us, and we're going to do our best to make sure that we can be able to continue the high excellence that this district has shown, and that may be somebody's phone. Anyway, thank you for being here and taking the time to help us understand where the community, what the community values. And one of the things that we have tried to do in the last couple of years is change our library system and how we use it and what we do in the Tacoma libraries. And each one of our classrooms, Superintendent Santorno, I believe that was 4 years ago, said we are going to have classroom libraries. So all of our classrooms, elementary school classrooms, now have classroom libraries in them, and that is helpful, and that does kind of compensate for the libraries not being opened. It doesn't replace them, but it is something that's high on our priority list. Sally, thank you for your comments on professional development around cultural competency. It weighs heavily with us as a board, as you well know. Well, with that, I think I will close our meeting, and thank you all for coming. So we are adjourned.